Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Relations between the world's two largest economies, China and the United States, are down the pit as COVID-19 goes on ravaging communities worldwide. U.S. President Donald Trump insistently blamed the pandemic on China, a big strain certainly on relations between the two countries. In Washington, there's also a sense of a nation sliding into open-ended conflict with China, eerily with little or no debate. It seems everywhere we turn, ties between China and the U.S. are in a sorry state. Many say the two countries have hit a new low in relationships since diplomatic ties were made 4 decades ago. Is a zero-sum mentality and policy the trouble? I asked that question to Dr. Richard Haass, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, who is a respected diplomat for decades. He wrote a new book titled The World, A Brief Introduction. In it, he told us, like it or not, we live in a global era, and we need to better understand it, both its promises and its threats, in order to make informed choices. Let's listen in. In New York, I'm joined by Dr. Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Haass, what a pleasure to see you.
Well, thank you so much. It's good to see you again as well.
And congratulations to the new book, The World, A Brief Introduction. Many say they wish to read the book 10 years earlier. There will be a lot of common sense in our world about history.
It's never too late to read it.
Talking about competitions of ideas, Dr. Haass, some suggest, I've been reading recently in Financial Times, for example, the scarcity of competition of ideas inside the United States regarding what the China policy should be. And it seems that everybody has become a hawk toward China. That's at least according to some commentators. Do you think that partly reflects the reality?
There's been a shift in the perception of China. It's much more critical than it was, both because of what China is doing at home as well as what it's doing abroad. So I think the overall perception in the United States of China has become much more critical. And consistent with that, the question of what U.S. policy toward China should be has also become tougher, or again, reflecting this criticism. And I think this goes across the political spectrum, by the way. This describes Democrats as well as Republicans. So it's not just the Trump administration. It's not just something in the context of an American election, but this will persist after November, no matter what the result is in our election. And I do think it represents disillusionment with Chinese behavior, how China has evolved over the years and decades, and real unhappiness, serious concern about Chinese behavior, again, at home as well as abroad.
What we have seen, China-U.S. relations over the past 2 to 3 months is really going free weight, as they say, downward between China and the United States, particularly from the Washington side, one policy after another against China. Some are even immature, have to be taken back, but being thrown out all the time. So Dr. Haass, some really wonder about the sensibility of these policies and the rationale of these policies.
Again, it's not how it looks from here. One sees a pattern of Chinese behavior over the last few months. And let me just make an earlier point. This is not just about the last few months. You're right, things have accelerated, but the trend of a deteriorating relationship between the United States and China has been going on for years now. There's a pattern of Chinese behavior. There's a debate. To what extent is this happening in part because the United States and the world are distracted by the coronavirus and the pandemic? To what extent is this stimulated by a desire at home to satisfy growing calls for nationalism, to distract attention at home from China's problems?
However, Dr. Haass, as you may know, the Chinese see it quite differently. At least many Chinese see it quite differently. They see a kind of stereotyped rhetorics coming out of Washington building up to some kinds of political conclusion that the administration want the American public to see, and therefore to build upon that, to have more quote-unquote different kinds of wars against China. Do you think in the U.S. know about that kind of suspicion from China?
Yes, and look, some of the rhetoric we used, I find wrong. The United States should not be using. I also think that while it's legitimate to criticize China for its initial handling of COVID-19, we can't blame China for our own mistakes, for our own policies, which have often been inadequate. So look, it's obviously seen differently in the two countries. And what I basically advise is the United States should not be against China's rise. China's future will be largely determined by Chinese policies, by Chinese leaders and the Chinese people. What we should do is push back when we disagree with what we see from China. We should push back in whatever way is appropriate. On the other hand, it should be the goal diplomatically to maintain or preserve or even create areas of cooperation where the possibility exists, be it to deal with North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles, whether over climate change, whether over global health. So look, this is going to be a difficult relationship. And you're right, it's deteriorated recently. The deterioration has accelerated, and the two countries see things very, very differently. I would strongly prefer the United States and China not end up in a quote unquote Cold War. I think it would be bad for each country. I think it would be bad for the world, but we're a lot closer to getting there today than we were 6 months ago.
We have seen international students being banned with their visa going into the United States if they're only taking online courses. Of course, that was rescinded by the administration later after U.S. university tried to sue the current administration. We also see Fulbright Scholars, which is a very key program supporting young academics for exchanges between China and the United States. What's wrong with that being canceled by this administration? We have also seen the Chamber of Commerce from the U.S. Inside Hong Kong has been asking the policy change from the current administration because punishing Hong Kong, in fact, punishing American businesses in Hong Kong. So the list is also a long one in terms of how wrong the policies are. Dr. Haass, once again, I want to come back to that original question. Is there real, rational, clear debate about all of the latest policies under this administration before they come out, and who will be responsible for the results once these policies were implemented and harm the fundamentals of this relationship between China and the United States? After all, two largest economies in the world we're talking about.
Again, the individual Americans disagree on specific policies. For example, you mentioned the policy about students and getting visas. And I think the decision to rescind the policy that would have made it impossible for students to come or stay here who were studying online, I think it was good that we rescinded the policy. I disagreed with it. I think the Fulbright program should be able to operate freely. We obviously disagree on Hong Kong. I don't understand why the United States would ship certain high technology items to Hong Kong. It may be good for American businesses there, but sooner or later, those items are going to end up on the mainland. So I actually think some of the economic penalties that were introduced against Hong Kong were overdue and were entirely warranted. Again, my point to you is simply it would be wrong to interpret what's going on in the United States in terms of thinking about China to simply dismiss it as American mistakes or somehow because of the American election campaign. It is broadly, criticism of China has become much more broadly held. People have a lot of concerns of whether it's over Chinese economic behavior, Chinese foreign policy, Chinese internal behavior, and which suggests to me that a more critical policy towards China will be American foreign policy, regardless of what happens this November.
Dr. Haass, do you think there is going to be danger of military confrontation between China and the United States in the near future? Are we already divorcing, decoupling, we're already in a new Cold War, as many have been using these terminologies recently?
I don't think we're in a new Cold War, and we can't divorce. There's too many connections between the two. The question is, can we limit in certain areas the economic relationship, particularly in areas of high technology? I think the answer there is probably yes. What I'm worried about is a military incident. If you remember, during the opening months of the presidency of George W. Bush, there was a military incident which complicated relations for 6 months. If there were an incident now in the South China Sea, it would be a real test to both sides to manage it. So I'm more worried about a military incident that could possibly escalate. I'm more worried about that today than I was, say, 6 months or a year ago. And again, it would be in the interest of neither side, of neither country, if this were to happen.
How to avoid that, do you think?
Well, look, the obvious way to avoid it would be, from an American point of view, for China to change some of the fundamentals of its policies. It's not going to. So then I think each side has to be, one, incredibly careful, exercise real discipline over its military forces, its naval ships, its aircraft, and so forth, and to keep open lines of communication.
But Dr. Haass, that's the problem, isn't it, about talking about lines of communication? We had various mechanisms of dialogues and discussions and conversations, but now those have been scrapped off as quote unquote unuseful.
No, I'd say we need to think about communication in two ways. First, we need communication, special lines of communication, hotlines, and other such things if there's an incident. We need crisis or emergency communications in order to manage crisis if there, for example, is an incident between our two militaries. At the same time, and fundamentally different, I believe it's important for the United States and China to have a serious, what I would call a real strategic conversation.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that it's happening?
And obviously, 3.5 months before an election campaign is not a great time to launch strategic conversation. So maybe that will have to wait until after the American vote in November.
Dr. Haass, a recent interview by Chinese Ambassador Choi Tian-kai to an America TV program, he suggested that fundamentally what is going on between China and the United States is whether the United States would be able to accept a country that is 5,000 years old but have a very different political, economic systems compared to that of the United States. Do you think that is the fundamental issue here?
No, I saw the interview, his interview with Fareed Zakaria. It was a very interesting interview. I have tremendous respect for your ambassador, who I've known now for probably 20 years.
Yes.
From China's point of view, that might be the question. From the American point of view, it's more whether a China that is increasingly powerful will use power responsibly, how it will treat its own people, how it will use its growing military and economic power around the world, whether it will follow global rules. So it's two very different perceptions.
Welcome back. COVID-19 spreads around the United States almost unchecked over the past few months. Earlier, we have heard health professionals from the country trying to explain the realities. Now let's go to Dr. Richard Haass once again for his thoughts about the politics and the geopolitics behind that topic. Let's listen in. What advice would you give, Dr. Haass, to many of your friends who are leaders of various countries who have to wait for at least 3.5 months for the dust in Washington to be settled before they think about what to deal with the United States and how to deal with their own international relations agenda?
Well, again, I'm careful about offering advice to others. I would simply say, to focus, to any person, to focus on those things he or she has control over. Mm-hmm. They obviously have more influence over their own international relations, over their own foreign policies. In case of the United States, there's nothing much you can do. You watch, you wait, and you see what happens. Certain things the election doesn't change. It changes policies and so forth. It changes style. It changes tone. But there's also underlying factors in the United States that will be consistent.
About the pandemic, how well do you think the U.S. has performed this time so far?
I'm very disappointed in what we've done. We have not done and we're not doing all that we should. And the result is that far more Americans have gotten ill, far more Americans have died. That should have been the case. And it's proving to be more difficult to restart the economy. So we are paying a price for what we've done and what we have not done.
Do you think a different administration would be very different in terms of policies and in terms of approaches and results?
On the coronavirus, yes. I think it's clear that if you have a Biden presidency, there'd be much more calls for Americans to wear masks. I think you'd probably see a greater emphasis on developing the sort of modern testing. We need tests that would be fast, that would be accurate, that could be conducted at the, say, just before somebody walks into a building. So I think the priority, the national priority given to dealing with with COVID-19 would go up dramatically if in a Biden administration.
But many suggest, Dr. Haass, also about the United States with this policies over the past few years, whether the U.S. Still care about its manner, its style, its image, and geopolitically, its soft power vis-a-vis its hard power. Once again, I have to mention, this administration has withdrawn the United States from many international treaties and international platforms. So, Dr. Haass, I don't want to put you into a difficult situation because you are not a member of this administration. But as a policymaker over the past decades, how do you look at where the U.S. is going?
Many areas I'm quite critical of this administration, and I think we have weakened what you described as our soft power. I think we've weakened it by international agreements and also by what's happened here at home. Our handling of the COVID-19 challenge has not strengthened how we are seen in the world. I also say, by the way, since this is a conversation about China and the United States, I think China has also weakened its soft power. I think we actually have a moment where China, because of things it has done in Hong Kong, at home, its mishandling of the outbreak of COVID-19 and so forth, it has weakened its standing. So we have a moment in international relations where the two leading countries in the world, the two most powerful countries in the world, both, I believe, have hurt their reputations and standing. And what this does to me is it contributes to a world that is less led, less organized. And this is part of a pattern we are seeing in the world at this moment in history.
Of course, Dr. Haass, just to balance that, as you may know, the Chinese side believe that the country has been very quick in acting about researching about COVID-19 at a time when the disease was still unknown to the rest of the world, providing genome sequence to the international community, reporting to WHO at the end of the year 2019. Having said that, though, let me move on, Dr. Haass, to another topic about the history, which you wrote about in your latest book. I really don't know anymore, Dr. Haass. Maybe you can help us to enlighten a little bit. Who really creates history? Some suggest it's really those who are brave and also have a strong sense of responsibility. Others suggest maybe only those who are crazy.
Interesting question. Who makes history are those who either come up with ideas that change the way other individuals and ultimately societies or economies operate. Great inventors, great thinkers can change the course of history, and obviously those with political power can change history, can make history. Only with the passage of time, only through history can one get a full appreciation usually of whether their impact on history has been benign or malign, has it been constructive or destructive. But history can change again from the top through political leadership or through the society. There's all sorts of ways for individuals in a society to make or change history. The great inventors, a Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, people like that, great entrepreneurs can change history. Jack Ma in China. So there's many entry points for individuals, including but not limited to political leaders.
My earlier conversation with Dr. Richard Haass, a veteran diplomat and president of the Council on Foreign Relations from the U.S. That's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, you can search online World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. And bye for now.